Okay, here we are. It's 3:33 and I'm only 3 minutes late. And so we'll just get started now. I'm John Celestri, John the Animator Guy, and we are going to be talking about how to create stories with beats, and not the purple beats, but regular story elements. And I have here this afternoon as my pal Ryan Winn. Here he is. Hey.
Hello,
Ryan.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, John. Sorry to step on your intro there. And hello, everyone watching and everyone watching later.
Yeah. I'm sure that that'll be more than that. So, okay. So, we were talking last week on just how to start building stories, and it's not a thing where you just have an idea, right? Remember, like last week we said, okay, I got an idea for a story, and blah 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 blah, but it's not really an idea. It's not really ready. It's just a concept, and we were going back and forth a bit, and we said, okay, what's the basic elements of how do you get a story? What is a story? What are those? What's the not the magic formula, but what's the recipe for creating a story? And all the elements are basically, salt, fat, sugar, which is your beginning, middle, and end. Those are the things that have to be satisfying in the correct amounts. And and then you have something, but you can do you have to understand what a beginning, a middle, and end entails, right? So
and that's what makes up a story. So if you're going to have a story, you got to make sure you at least have those three things.
Right. Well, and look at how many endings are there, or are there any endings to comics today?
Okay, that's a good way to look at that.
There's a lot of middle. It's just a continuation from one issue to the next, going into another, series, dovetailing, working. There's no real beginning anymore unless you start at book one. Right?
Well, yeah, and I think that comes from there's that fear of losing the public. So you want to touch on something they're familiar with. So we'll continue that story. We obviously have new ideas because we're creators. So here's a couple new ideas.
Yeah.
But these new ideas, we're gonna siphon from them and pull into this bigger event, and then they just keep building these events on events on events, and it really is difficult to jump in anywhere on this stuff without reading a bunch of things to catch up. Like you said, there's no beginning, middle, or end.
Right. It's one continuous soap opera.
There's no landmarks.
Yes. Well, I was looking through my collection, and I realized that even the more recent comics that I have within that are still in the 80s. I mean, that's how old my collection is, in terms of that's the last time I really bought books. And a lot of those books were like the Flaming Carrot. Those were underground comics, in the true independent concept. But when I was growing up, every comic was basically, every story had a beginning, middle, and end, and you might have had 2 or 3 of them in the issue of Superman or Batman or Detective Comics or what have you. It was easy to suddenly be able to jump into something because, after a couple of issues, you knew, oh, that's what this character can do. But each story was satisfying in itself. It doesn't feel like, oh, I got gypped. Or what do you mean I got to buy another one to find out what was going on because I didn't get enough. That's a different story today. No pun intended.
No, that's that's great. No, I totally agree. And something that I've said in our other interviews and stuff too is something I appreciated from the 60s to the 80s that Marvel especially did was they knew they had to sell product.
Mm-hmm.
They were that you read these Jack Kirby interviews, you read Jim Starlin interviews. They understood they were moving product. They didn't have this, I'm an artiste, I will create art and hopefully people will love it. No, they were actively trying to create things that would move and sell and intrigue people. And those stories, they did such a good job for the most part, generally speaking, that you never felt like you had to go get this other issue. You felt like you wanted to go get this other issue. That like they teased something, you're like, oh, well, there's an editor's note about this happened in Hulk whatever a few issues ago. I want to know that. It never felt like, I'm pressured in, or a fake, a cheesy cliffhanger that didn't mean anything, but I really want to know what happened, so I have to buy the next one. They made you feel like you wanted that next thing, and I think that's the important play we have to figure out, where we're doing a commercial product. We're not being artistes in a sense. We're being artists and craftsmen, and we're making a commercial product that needs to speak to people and entertain them to the point where they want to purchase more of said product.
Right. And that
while being entertained.
Right. I think I will always point to the first 10 issues of the Fantastic Four as the prototype. That's to me, that is really the launching of the Marvel age with those 10 issues, because if you read them consecutively, they look like they are of a piece, because they kept on changing and developing the personalities and the relationships, and introducing new things, and and showing how Ben Grimm by issue 4, Johnny Storm by issue 3 he's split, and issue 4 he's living on the Bowery, and he runs across the Bowery was a slum section of New York City. So that's where he comes across the Submariner, who has been living as a bum for like 20 years or 10 or 15 years or whatever it is, with amnesia, and they find. So there's a lot going on. I mean, the development and how they did it wasn't like, okay, you have to do this. Unless you do this or that, you don't fulfill certain elements. They weren't just making it up as they went along. They were at their peak of, I know how to do this. They were in their 40s when they were doing this.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people forget. Like, Jack had a long career of learning how to do it before he really became the Jack Kirby that we all know and love.
Right. Yeah. So and what people forget is that Marvel and most of the comic book industry was ready to just close up shop before Kirby went back in, and they started doing. He was doing those monster comics. Remember, Fing Fang Boom, whatever it is.
No, I love all those Kirby monsters. Goom, Fin Fang Boom, like all their names that are just random vowels with consonants on the other side. Just whatever he felt like that month or that week.
Right. I want to say hi to Wizard, Warzard, the Board Time Lord, and me Horror Show.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Yeah.
I think that's Warzard. Like war.
Warzard? Okay. Oh, okay. Well, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't understand pronunciation. So there you go. I still pronounce coffee. I don't say. I pronounce coffee, and with the W. Remember.
That's. I'll remember that for sure.
Okay.
I'm gonna say one more hello. We've got
Oh, yeah.
Regina just popped in, and Diablo Hashcraft. Diablo's a friend of mine, and he's a big Alterna fan and an indie comic supporter, and a all around great guy.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Oh, give them the little time on the screen there, Regina, and then Diablo. There you go. So, all right.
Back to it.
Go back to it now. All right. So you got the elements and the beats are you've got a beginning, a middle, and an end. Okay. And for me, in the beginning, you introduce all the characters, the setting, and your major conflict in that.
Mhm.
Now, it's not like each one you have to have and there's also something called tone. In
Mhm.
terms of understanding tone, it's what it feels like. What's your is it a comedy? Is it a horror show? Is it what is it that you're actually happening? What kind of a book is it? What kind of a story is it? So you have
Mhm.
to do that. Um, and you don't say like introduce the characters. John Celestri is a 40-year veteran of the animation industry. He was so and so. No, it's in their actions. You introduce these characters. You introduce them all at once, and to do it well and to do it entertainingly, it's simultaneously. It's
Mhm.
in there. You are as a best example is for and we can do one for you. I have Nicky Nardson, is a nerd. Well, and he's a bullied nerd at a school. And so basically, the opening page is he's in the boys' room, and you could see him all dressed up with his certain shirt and tie and sort of a school uniform. And he's washing his hands, and the door slams open, and a bunch of bullies come in and say, "Hey, look, it's Nick the nerd. Yeah, how's the birthday boy doing? What you been doing? Brown nosing the school? You washing your hands because you're busy brown nosing the teacher, eh? And they go back and forth, and he gets a swirly right there by the bottom of the page. So right there, you've set up a whole bunch of circumstances right there in one page. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen. This is all fiction. It never happens to you. But there might be one or two young readers boys who might have had that experience in some way, shape, or form.
I can tell you, the neighborhood I grew up in, we had kids of every age. Our street it was a cul-de-sac, and every house had kids ranging from every age. So when I was in junior high, we had the high schoolers that were right above us, and they would tell us the horror stories of the things they were going to do to us once we became freshmen.
Yeah.
And Swirly was number one on my list of things I was afraid of. So as a kid, if I read something that had a swirly or something like you just described with the Mega Moose and the Nikki moment, that's a visceral moment to me as a kid, because I do not want the bullies giving me a swirly, and I'm gonna do whatever I can to make sure I'm not alone in that bathroom. I'm not near it when they're there. Like, that's a great moment to have for a frightful moment. We're laughing about it, but it's that it brings that bit of fear that helps with the adventure feel.
Right, and immediately we are when you're introducing characters, you want them to say, "I associate with this guy," or at least I'm empathetic with that character. If you're going to have a hero, you can't make it just it's not Superman. It's kind of like, oh, how is this character going to survive? You have to care about that character. So, but that's one of the things that I think, and we've discussed this before, but my focus is on bringing young readers into the world of comics, and the only way to my feeling is that the reader, the young reader, has to associate in some way, shape, or form with the hero. Otherwise, that character, the reader will always be arm's distance from that character.
Mm-hmm. True. And I don't even think it's necessarily that it even has to be the age of the character. Like something I think Star Wars did really well that made kids still identify with childlike aspects in the characters, where Luke wanted to go and do something new. Mm-hmm. And as his kids, we want to do something new. So it didn't matter that it didn't really matter what age Luke was. Luke could have been a 10-year-old or a 20-year-old, as long as he had that, like, but Uncle Owen, I want to go do a thing, just like we do. And even Han Solo is the kid that, don't tell me what to do, I'll do my own thing. So as a kid, I really liked that aspect of Han Solo. I kind of liked his hey, don't tell me what to do. I'm a tough guy on my own. I can, and so it's like you have those aspects in Nikki, and they even exist in like Luke Skywalker. So it's like. Mm-hmm. You have to, if you're writing an adult character for a kid, you still have to look at that. How is a kid going to identify with this?
Right.
Because he's not going to identify with experience. Their experiences are going to be different. So it has to be something more internalized.
Right. Well, Me Horror Show says, how about narration?
Well, go ahead. You go first, John.
Okay. What I feel is that if we are in if you want to do narration, it really what kind of book are you talking about to begin with? All right, if you're going to write something that is going to be text heavy to set the tone of everything, that's more of a book than rather a visual comic book. Setting that time and place and everything. I don't know. I mean, there's no real right or wrong answer to that. But you know what? It depends on whether or not people are going to be interested in reading a lot of text, because getting the visualization of what is happening is, to me, in comics, that's what it's all about in terms of it being a visual medium. And so if you're going to write something that you're lettering, and you've got, if the whole page has about 500 words or 250 words in the entire page, well, that's a lot of time. And then how much, why would you draw that? That's a thing, is that you have to, it's in terms of, my training has always been lean words, even when writing novels, wrote 5 novels, published 5 novels, mystery novels. Everything has to be lean. Every word has to be there for some reason. And many of the times I'm describing an action in a way that is really concise and straightforward, or dialogue, but it's not explaining dialogue. Dialogue should not be telling the reader what you're showing on the picture, for comics at least. Same way with animation, dialogue is to a minimal,
Well, the saying a lot of people like to use in animation and comics is show, don't tell.
Right.
Because you have the opportunity to show and not tell. And something I learned doing Gods and Gears, because we do some narration in Gods and Gears, and it was actually something I was against at first when I started writing the story, for all the things that we just talked about. Mm-hmm. And then I started thinking, I was like, well, there's certain times I do like narration. When is it that I like narration? Because I hadn't actually broken that down. I hadn't decided when I like it, when I hadn't. I just knew that there were times I didn't and times that I did. And what we discovered in the process of our story was, like you had said, character action, character development, and dialogue between characters should not be explained by narration. Where we found narration useful was when we were explaining the lore or the backstory in a short segment. Like, say, in the beginning of issues 2 through 3, we have a little bit of backstory with the gods. And we found that narration over that kind of helped that feel like a storybook to inform you. but none of that was informing you on the character development or the character interplay.
Right.
All of that explanation and all of the exposition that teaches you about the characters was done through action and dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So even though we have narration, we don't have narration for the sake of narration, and it's filling in gaps that the characters cannot play out. And
Right.
that's where I discovered, I was like, oh, okay, so in Star Wars, and I just go back to that because it's a nice simple one that people like to use for breaking down stories.
Right.
So they have the opening crawl, which
Right.
is sort of like narration. And you know what? You don't want to have to sit through all that in a movie. Give me that in the blurb, then get to the character development. And
Right.
and that's what they do. They stop explaining and they get into showing. And
Right.
they're like, here's how Darth is, here's how Leia is, here's how Luke is, here's how Han. So it's that. Yeah, and think about Star Wars. There's no narration,
Mm-hmm.
but then when Obi-Wan is telling a story, that almost works as narration because we start to fill our imaginations the way Luke is, thinking about the Clone Wars and his father or whatever. So that's kind of where I was like, oh, so narration can fill us in on bigger things, but it does not push the story and it does not push the characters. It's just
Right.
a helper.
Right.
It's a tool. It's not a ways to a mean, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Narration, I mean, in dialogue, is there if that's the only way that your main character can find out information from the past, well, okay, that makes sense because you can't keep doing flashbacks,
Mhm.
it just and so there's that element of it. Now, I know that in so many fantasies and fantasy books and what have you, there is a lot of lore that they're trying to build. Okay,
Mhm.
Now, okay, I understand it. That's your world building, and there's that element. But I think for this particular type of storytelling we're talking about is a limited number of pages in it for a comic book, and it's visual.
Yes.
Verbal is a completely different ball of wax. I mean, it's two different things going on. So
Mhm.
I would say for to make the most of what we have on the page size and the page numbers, we need to understand what the tools are and what the limitations of the tools are, and also the limitation of patience that our readers will have. They want to look at and study at something. They want to study something on the page because they are attracted to it, not because they're forced to chew over and think of words and trying to say, okay, well, why don't you just show me the picture? That's if you know what I mean. So,
No, I don't like to, as we've said before, I don't name names when I'm giving bad examples, but there's plenty of comics out there where the narration, if you will, or the caption box is the night was dark and full of stars, and then the panel is a night image full of stars.
yeah,
And you don't need the two.
no,
That's say if you want text there, let that be a character's dialogue that leads to the next scene,
Yeah.
or something like that. Because once the viewer sees the night stars, they know that
Yeah.
the night is dark and the sky is
Mhm.
full of stars. I see that,
Okay, yeah, that's and that's it. But then once again, I think these are the elements that we want to. I mean, this is how I work. Yeah, this is how you're working, and I do think that a certain amount of successful professionals who have a lot of readership, that's what this works on. These are the basic elements and recipe. You can do a short story or a novel basing these elements and using them to create your finished piece. So that's what
of any length.
of any length.
Of any length.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, we've got, as I said, we've got the beginning, introduce characters, the setting, and the conflict. Then you have the middle, okay? And that's you've had a conflict, you've introduced the conflict, then you ramp up the conflict, and you go back and forth. Now, you don't want to do it, I mean, it's not just fighting. Conflict is not the fighting, the back and forth. It could be, any kind of conflict. An example in the book that was written by Saul Stein, who was one of the best editors of any, for theater and for novels. He said, when you're doing, it's like you have two characters have gotten two completely different scripts, and they don't know what the other person's script is. And so you put them at, you put one character on, one actor behind, out off screen, off stage. They don't know how you're directing the other character, the other actor, and you've given that script. You say, okay, I want you to do this, and this, and then he goes away. And the other character comes in, the actor, and you're given this script, and blah, 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 blah. And so they don't know what the other script is. And there's conflict in it. How do they get around each other? So they have to start, they know that they don't know what the other person's motivation is. So you don't know what they really want out of things. But that's how you have to think of your characters, is they can't read each other's minds, and they're not going to, unless they start to learn that they are compatible. But as in real life, you don't know what the other person's thinking. You don't know what their motivations are. You only know that through actions and interactions. And so that's where your conflict is what is the interactions? How does it go back and forth? And is it for a long period of time? Or a short period of time until you get to the end, which is the climax and resolution of the conflict. That's why you could do a lot, even in 6 pages in comic books. Like, that's how you think in those terms and your elements, and it doesn't matter what you throw in. Those are the things that you have to think of.
Exactly. And then that's what helps you start to really develop your characters too, is how they interact with each other. And the thing I learned was, and I know you know this for a fact, is that you have an idea for a character. Once you put them up against the other character, your original idea starts to adjust a little bit. And you start to discover the characters more so that way than just creating them. And that's where I think a lot of people get intimidated by this part of writing, but I think if you get into it, this is a really fun aspect and part of writing. You're going to be letting go of some stuff of your character, but you're going to be learning what really makes them. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a fight. It could be something as simple as a misunderstanding, whatever that conflict is. The conflict is a spectrum that ranges from the mundane to the violent, that you can carry over. But yeah, sorry, go on. I'm rambling now.
No, you keep on going. If you, in this now that we have the beats, we're talking about beats within this. Okay, well, depending upon how many, I mean, you could do the beats here as like you've got introducing characters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's the introduction, setting, conflict, ramp up, conflict, back and forth, climax, resolution. That's 7 beats right there. Okay. Now, within that, you start adding sub beats. Doing things like I say, what's going to happen here? What's going to happen there? How do I introduce this character? What's this? What's going on here? You start developing all of that, and in books, each panel could be a beat. Depending upon what it is. Even with it, or if you like to make long panels, the way I like to do that, you might have several beats going on within that long panel. It depends on
Yeah.
how you focus things.
Yeah, because on a wide shot, you can be panning across as you get different dialogues from different characters, and that's in action. And then in action, you could have something like the bouncing ball effect, where your character is rolling or flying or tumbling, and you're getting that repeated or sequential action across one panel. I love doing stuff like that. I like playing with the real estate and the timing on that said real estate.
Right.
Just knocked my phone there.
Yeah. Well, when we're doing material like this, I don't like just typing, starting at the beginning and middle and end. I mean, I think of ideas here, there, everywhere. So I just put an individual idea on a Post-it note and slap it onto a piece of paper, and I keep layering it, until maybe I might have, 12 Post-it notes on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and
I work very similar.
Yeah, well, and in many cases, once I've got all that, I start typing it out, but I still don't edit anything until I'm just saying these are the elements, and I say, okay, will this work with that? In that area, do I have to move this character around? And I've got material that I just edited out in the 2 stories I've done for Mega Moose. Where this stuff I can't introduce it. There's not enough time, and it doesn't make sense to do this. So I'm keeping backstory, out of it, even though I might hint on it later, or in what I've got, but it's something to go back to later and introduce as part of another story. And you don't have to throw everything at the audience, but you still have to give them enough that they will feel satisfied when they come to the end that the story is completed. You can't just say, well, I'll tell you more later on. I just want to, and I've cut, like when I was doing this, the second Mega Moose story, I thought, well, I'll have so many pages of conflict and so on, so they're fighting this monster and whatnot, and then it turned out I cut out 4 pages. Originally it was going to be a 20-page story, and I said, I don't need that. That's not necessary. Pull it. That's just an overwhelming thing. So I said, okay, and so it's down to a 16-page story, and it felt okay. There is a pacing that goes on with all your panels. You don't have to keep doing it, and because that's becomes boring to me. But if you always have too many fights, one thing I liked about Fantastic Four, the Thing wasn't having a fist fight for 15 pages out of the 24.
No, when I think of the Thing, I think of his conflicts with Alicia. I think of him roaming the streets at night, wishing that he could still be normal and go and do the things he did. Like, those were the things that impacted me more as a kid. Where, I mean, I loved when it was clobbering time. I mean, I love clobbering time just as much as anyone else. But when you said the first 10 issues of Fantastic Four, first thing that popped in my head was Ben with his hat on, his jacket up, being lonely, and it was so character driven.
Yes.
The Fantastic Four was so character driven that it almost could have been science and power free.
Yeah.
It almost could have just been a regular soap opera with these people, but that's not going to keep us kids interested. No. So we'll add the superpowers and stuff. But the basics of it was that story about people and their personalities and how they dealt with conflicts, like we said, ranging from the mundane to the violent.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there was the big competition between Reed Richards and Ben Grimm for Sue Storm, right?
That's right. I forgot about stuff like that.
You forgot that. That was originally, that was when they had the they hated there was this thing of this competition between Reed and Ben, and then Johnny Storm, who was a Sue's kid brother, they were just going back and forth with Ben, and like crazy.
I love that.
Okay, the crazy thing, and then you throw in the Sue Storm's sort of attraction to Namor, the Submariner. So you had all of that going on, for maybe a year or two.
Mm-hmm. And as you're mentioning all this, I forgot that the Fantastic Four was going from the from issue 1. They were really diving into stuff. I forgot that Namor came in that soon in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've got so many years of having these characters repeated that you kind of forget that they go back to the original idea.
Yeah. I mean, Doctor Doom.
Concept.
I mean, Doctor Doom is the original Darth Vader.
Oh yeah.
Okay. I mean, let's put it this way. There's no getting around that. But
no.
But Doctor Doom, I mean, is in issue number 5. So you had Namor in number 4. In issue 5 is Doctor Doom, who was a friend of Reed Richards.
Mm-hmm.
They were friends. Then there was the team up between Namor and Doctor Doom against the Fantastic Four in issue number 6. To me, that's one of the classic stuff. And then Namor sort of turns on Doctor Doom and helps the Fantastic Four, but yet he leaves them and blah 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 blah. There's a lot. There was a lot going on there. So they were all, and there were each individual 23 to 24 page stories that each were complete within themselves, but you knew there was more stuff coming afterwards.
Yep, they kept you fed, but kept you wanting that next meal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go back and reread some of those. It's been so long. Fantastic Four is one of the few things like Spider-Man where I've read a good chunk of all of them throughout, and I've read good chunks throughout the entire series. But that's one I haven't studied or looked at in a long time. And now that I'm writing more, I think I'd like to go back and see that, because I appreciate that was especially when Jack was plotting really strong. Right. And I know people have their opinions on Jack and Stan's relationship, but I think that they were such a good mix when Stan was peppering his beautiful language over Jack's ideas. And I think the Fantastic Four was one of the best places that we got that mixture. Right.
I think at some point, and that's when I mean, Fantastic Four starts about it was 1962, 63, 62. So I'm like 13 years old, and that's when Fantastic Four is introduced. And maybe up until about 1964, 65, I'm in high school, and I start losing interest. But one thing I do, I got into high school when I was 6 in 1963. So, I was still, following the books and whatnot. But at a certain point, I went, I've got other things to do. I'm 15, 16 years old. Okay, I got other things to do. And so I still have those books from then, But yes, I have.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got 2 SpiderMans #1. So I mean, that's like.
Wow, that's awesome. Not even for the monetary value, just the historic value of having something that cool.
I sometimes on Twitter I'll post some of these these covers, this, I'll scan them and put them in, and I refer to them as treasures from underneath my bed.
I've seen that. I like that. That's funny.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Spider-Mans, a lot of Fantastic Fours, the Hulks, and all, but you can go back and you look at that, and there is a period of time that there was so much that was generated in such a short period of time, so much, and then today everything is just built off of that. That seed time. So, but anyway, I was
back to the beats.
Pardon?
Back to the beats.
Yes. Yep. There you go. Well, let's now when one of the things that I think about in terms of the story beats, and that is that that sometimes you'll have them doing things on a page in your thumbnails that are saying, wait a minute, I wrote this out with notes, but you know what? I tried to describe this, and I don't bother describing anything other than a bare bones description of what has to happen, and also what the character is feeling at the time, so that I will start thinking about the dialogue before I start drawing it. Unless it's something strong and needs to be done, I'll just leave it. And then I've got pages where there is no dialogue. I mean, I just don't see the necessity to have, wisecracks or statements or whatnot while there's action going on. Unless it really is, there is a crucial point of what the character is about to say. There's a lot of eek, and it's what's going on here? No, holy smoke, or great horny toads, or something like that. So there is that. So for yourself, when you're dialoguing stuff, at what point are you finishing up? When you pull your stuff together and you're drawing it and you're thumbnailing it, do you find yourself sometimes saying you should go off in a different direction, get pulled into a different direction, or do you stop, or what do you do? What happens to you?
So I do. My process is very similar to yours. Instead of 7 points, I work off 8 points, and then I do the same. Like, I either make notes on Post-it notes or scrap paper and collect those separately. And they may be ideas that, like you said, they come in various times and stuff. So I tend to keep my dialogue really, really loose until the very end. But I like to keep the ideas solid. Like you said, I like to have character A is going to feel jealousy here, and we want to make sure we play that up, whether that's in his expression and his action, or he says, I'm jealous. But I find myself limiting even so I get to the point where I'm like actually doing the dialogue, and I'll find myself editing even the thoughts I have down to what's their expression showing, what is the action showing, how little can I actually say here. Because as a fairly new writer, especially a couple years ago when I was really starting, I found myself using way too many words. But then I found when I edited myself, I'd go the opposite, and I'd take away too many words and try to imply things that didn't need to be. I was trying to imply things that needed to be stated or needed to be clear in the story, and I wasn't. And that took me working with my artist and I don't really have an editor, but I'm bouncing stuff off Peter, and I have a couple friends that I bounce things off of in an editorial fashion. And luckily they would help me out here with like, that's not clear at all. They're very blunt, my friends. They're like, that does not work at all. I send them a page, I go, can you tell what's happening? And they go, no. I don't understand what's happening. So then I tried to started to look at my favorite comics, and I was like, how much do my favorite comics, how much do they deliver? How much do they make me think about and interpret or infer on my own? And started applying some of that to my own work. And I think if somebody were to read issues 1 through 4, you'll notice that by issue 4, my dialogue is much smoother, less clunky, more informative with less words, which I struggle. That's a big struggle for me, is to say my point, but in as few words or sentences as possible, which is what you need in a comic. I don't want to create talking heads that people have to read and read and read. I want them to look at these cars jumping and crashing onto hot air balloons and giant gorillas beating up zombies, and then I want them to just be looking at all that and just have the dialogue pepper in the personality of the characters and things like that.
Well, Diablo Hashcraft says, will you trim dialogue to make room for art space on page? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and basically you'll learn as an when you're writing, less is more. I mean, you could be extremely specific with your dialogue, and you just if unless it's necessary to convey, an emotion, or rather an argument between two people, it's not really necessary. And at times, the dialogue sometimes is there too because you feel you need to have dialogue, but that's not true. I mean, that was one point that I was going to say earlier on, was as I got older and I was watching and the Marvel became Stan Lee Presents, it became too verbose for me. The Shakespearean stuff, it was overwritten to the point where I said, oh, come on, let leave it alone. There was a lot of self-importance in the dialogue, and it was, I mean, it's not like watching, what's the word? If you look at at seasons of Deadwood, it becomes very, very Shakespearean in terms of attitude, the dialogue. But that was the way they spoke back then. I mean, that actually did turn the latter part of the 19th century. That was the way people expressed themselves. So that made sense. But in the 1960s, it was kind of like there was a lot of showing off, and ye hear Yark and so, and after a certain, for me as a 16-year-old, I was saying, hey man, stop it. Yeah,
because you guys were trying to be like hip and with it at that age in the 60s. You weren't trying to seem like a smart hoity-toity Shakespeare-loving businessman or anything like that. You wanted to be the kind of cool and like
right. But again, you've got to remember that is again 1960. By that point, I'm 16 years old, and Stan and Jack are my dad's age.
So I'm you're not identifying with them as individuals at this point.
No, I'm identifying with the reader. It was aimed at 14 to 15 to 16-year-olds. It was a big deal that suddenly that college students on campus were starting to watch to read the Marvel books. That was a big thing back then, because we had just gone through the period of time of the 50s. We were breaking out of that, where you had the Comics Code, and the seduction of the innocents, and all of the stuff of comic books were bad for human consumption. Kids were juvenile delinquents, not because of poverty, but because they read bad comic books. There was that. So you've got, and so therefore you have to remember what it is that what's the age and emotional maturity in terms of just actual development for the reader that you're aiming at. And that's a hard thing to do, because by the time you get a certain a skill set and experience, you're no longer aiming at a younger group. You're aiming at your peers, which is why we have the state of comics the way we're in right now, because they're just writing for other 30, 40, 50-year-olds.
Exactly, and that's like one of the things we touched on the last time. I said I had seen a writer at one of the big two saying that he wanted to write his books to feel like after-school specials, which were lessons for children about how to behave that were usually done in a trite kind of way that no one really, you didn't really learn the lesson, or they're telling you stuff we all know, that like be nice to your neighbor. You're like, yeah, we all know that. Stop trying to preach it to us. So I was like, why would you want to write for an adult? That didn't make any sense to me. It felt like they didn't know who or what they were writing for, that they were just writing off their own ego instead of writing for a perceived audience, because the general audience is not children these days. So why would you write an after-school special? And an adult reader, normal person, does not want to be patronized to about how to act or feel or anything like that. Right. So I was really confused when I saw that statement, it was a statement, and there was a sentiment that was shared by many professionals, and I was just like, who are you selling these books to? Because as an adult, I ain't interested, and I can tell you, as a kid, I definitely would not have been interested in that sort of pandery lesson teaching, that it would almost be like if the entire thing about Megamoose was just about the bully kid instead, and about bullying being bad. And you're like, no, that comes in as part of the story. That's not the entire story, just saying bullying's bad the whole time. No, we're gonna see what these bullies about. We're gonna see how they push the character in a certain direction, and then we're gonna see how the character's reaction, like you said, then we have our back and forth that builds towards our conflict and resolution. It's not just a preachy lesson the entire time or anything like that, which nobody wants. Nobody
wants that stuff. No, I mean, basically, again, with Megamoose, for me, it was like, if I was 12 years old, what kind of if I were bullied, I would want to read about somebody who gets even with the bully, maybe. But then what happens? I mean, I want power. I want power. Yeah. I want to be able to just turn into something else that I'm not. And so you work it that way. I mean, the closest thing is in terms of it's not even a lesson. It's just a straightforward piece of dialogue and just a piece of advice, because their interaction between Nikki and the wizard, who's his name is the wizard is the janitor for the school. And he's mopping the floor, and he's Mr. N, and he's Nikki has done a vlog, showing how he turns into Megamoose, and he shows I could jump in the air, I can fly, and I can lift giant trees and whatnot. And he's showing his video. I mean, a 12-year-old was showing his video to the wizard. The guy was giving him the power. He says, "Hey, I tried showing it to kids, and no one will believe me. They say they're saying I did with special effects." I mean, and so and the wizard is mopping about. He says, "Well, why the hell do you?" I don't say why the hell. He says, "Why do you care about what what they think about it. Why do they want? Why would you want to? What does it matter to you? He said, well, because Nikki said, I really just I want to show that I'm somebody special. I can do these things. And he said, well, and so the wizard say, well, don't care about it. Just think of this as the perfect secret identity. No, you don't have to worry about keeping something from people. They won't believe you anyway, right? So, but that's
well.
Great.
And that builds in the hero aspect of what your character learns, is that he doesn't need the backpats to do this.
Yeah.
Like, you want that and this or that, but in the end, it's you're going to be a hero because it's the right thing to do. I mean, yeah, there's that little act or little revenge aspect in that, like, hey, I got the power, and the bullies can't affect me in the same way and stuff. But then he's, you're doing so much more, and with a lesson like that, where you're like, you don't need your back pat to be a hero. Just be the hero, do the right thing, and the back pats will come. Maybe it's the lesson is don't look for the back pats.
I didn't do it. It was a kind of like, what do you care? You know who you are. You know what you can do. You don't need everybody else to say so and so, but there's still that struggle that everybody has of wanting to be acknowledged for who you are. But if nobody knows you're Mega Moose, you can again do all these amazing things. Well, there's a lesson in itself. I mean, that don't ask for it. You may want to just stay that way. So anyway, but that's all part of it. But it wasn't intentionally. I didn't come up with those lines right there as I was typing out this thing. It happened while I was drawing it, and all of that dialogue, I was roughing it out. I was roughing out the pages. I was doing thumbnails and whatnot. I said, "Oh, here's something. Oh." The thumbnail stage where you were doing all this, you start putting all this material together. That's where you start changing and actually morphing the material and molding it into something that you didn't expect to see. And that's all part of it. But the structure still has to be there. You have to have something to work with.
Well, it's like a house structure, and one of the things we may have touched on this in our last talk too is I've mostly worked with young artists, not writers, in learning the craft and discussing the craft. But the same thing would apply. Where young artists, they never wanted to draw the structure. They didn't want to do the circle and then the jaw and then the line, and then they didn't want to do these things that add up to your basic head shape. Because they felt that, like, well, everyone does it that way. That's just, I'm an artist. And like I always say, there's a difference between artist and artiste. Sometimes people are trying to be an artiste when they really should be focusing on commercial artist as the aspect. So you want to draw the head the same way. Your style will become apparent, and its uniqueness will become apparent as you add the details. And it's the same thing with story, where here's a 3-act structure. Well, I'm a young creator. 3-act structure, that's been around forever. I don't want to deal with that. I'm gonna do a new way that writes from within me, with how I feel and this or that. First of all, you will end up coming really close to the classic 3-act structure, because it's inherent in us. With that beginning, middle, and end. It's the way life works. It's the way we act. It's the way stories play out. So you're always that Joseph Campbell hero story. You can try to avoid it all you want. You will end up going back there. If things work out right in your story, you'll end up back at that point, having followed that structure. Or you're going to end up with a story that doesn't flow, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't resonate quite well with people, or with the masses, I should say. So it's that structure, same for drawing or same for story. Don't fear the structure. The structure is not to hinder you. Excuse my voice. The structure is not to hinder you. The structure is not to hold you back or even to contain you. It's just to give you the ability to lay your personality and your ideas over it.
Right.
And that way, that structure helps you communicate your ideas to other people.
Right.
And those beats in the order that you gave, we find those same beat. Like we could compare beat for beat on Gods and Gears and Mega Moose, and we could drop all the names and all the characters, and we're gonna have very similar beats for our characters because that's how we move through life, and that's how we live stories and tell stories. So I always try to tell people, don't be afraid of the drawing or the writing structure because it's not a cage. Right. It's something you build on. It's not something you're trapped within.
Well, but the thing about it is that people think that, oh well, I'm too constricted. Well, you know what? It's a tool. I mean, a house is basically a box, and if you don't build that box with strength and the support, it'll collapse. It just won't hold. I mean, you can do a monologue. A monologue is one thing, but a monologue in any way is still basically has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has, you build, here's the theme, here's my argument, and here's my conclusion. And if you don't have that, all you're doing is just stream of consciousness, but it has to be somewhere. It has to do something, especially if you expect people to pay money for it and to come back to hear more. Because unless you have you've come with a conclusion, you've given them something, for them to feel satisfied with, they're not gonna dig into their pockets for the next time you want to say something.
And see, that line that you just said there, that's a good way that people need to remember it too, is they're not going to dig into their pockets. When we're doing these commercial products that are going out to the public, you have to respect the fact that people are putting their hard-earned money towards your project. And I don't think a lot of people appreciate that. So I always try to let younger creators know that appreciate the fact that even though it's only $3, that somebody's decided to take that money from that job they hate doing every day. They hate going there. They decide to take those few bucks and give them to you. So, or us or me, and so we got to make it so worth it for them.
There's I've put up here. Maria has asked, do you have the characters interact with a larger plot in mind, or just in that moment setting? Well, to me, unless you are planning to reveal something later on and not, well, it's hard to say. I mean, the larger plot is just how they're going to live the characters. I mean, it's depending upon how big a story are you talking about. Okay, but I do know that when we're doing a beginning, middle, and end, and if that's the only story that you're ever going to do, well, you better resolve that at that point. Okay, now you can have a larger plot, but the thing about it is that then you're into a mini series. You can have an overarching plot, which is your life. Okay, but you don't want to set something that you're maybe 14 episodes later you're going to go back to. I think you should just keep it. I mean, at least at this particular case, I think if you're going to do an issue, or you're going to do a 48-page graphic novel, or a 72-page graphic novel, yeah, you can set that up, so that later on you go back to that. but it's something that you've set up for to be resolved later on, and you can go back to it. I mean, mysteries are like that all the time. The detectives see a clue. They don't know that they've seen a clue until they realize it, like in the last third of the mystery, the detective mystery. They say, "Oh, wait a minute. Back then, this is what was happening there." So you can set things up a lot, but in comics, you don't know it unless you are going to give an entire piece to say it'll be resolved in the next issue. I think that's a bit of a cheat because some people may not want to come back and they may feel, gypped on that, or they may not. They may decide they want to come back to you. It's kind of like when we're talking about people paying their money. Well, crowdfunding is going to be it will be the biggest source for new people's work, and so therefore I really believe every project that comes out, until you have cred, each one should be self-contained with the sense of there is more to come. It's kind of like those first 10, Fantastic Four, issues, they can stand alone and then say, "Oh, I wish I could get that there, but this here, it gave me a beginning, middle, and end. So yeah, that's cool. I like that." But then there's another story that, for me, it's the kid, it's Nicky Nardson and his life now that he has the power to turn into the super being. What is he going to do? How is he going to react? How is he going to grow? What's going to happen? That's the overarching story. But within that, there are, there might be segments of 24, 16, 12-page episodes in his life, moving along in there, but each one has to stand alone on its own. So that's what I would be saying, so I don't know.
Yeah, and to add to that, even just if she's asking about or no, to go into just a little more depth about that, let me say, how do I describe this? The way a writer friend of mine described character involvement with the overall plot and things was, you have the world that they live in that acts as a certain way, and the story, this also depends on how involved your character, if they're reacting to what's going on, or if they're active or passive, basically. Are they passive to what's going on or active? And in your story, it already sounds like we've got a passive character who becomes active, which is the hero's journey. It's that's how that works. But so I always look at it like my friend said it. She said there's the bigger world that everything acts or everything lives in, and the characters respond to that world with their actions, and so the world informs the character actions, the character actions inform the character dialogue.
Right.
Yeah. If that makes sense. So that was the way that she broke it down for me, where I was like, oh, okay, because I was wondering kind of a similar thing where how much importance to the big story does each character have to mention when they're talking this? And she was like, well, no, but you got to think about it in real world sense too, that we have this overall world where things are happening, and then your characters are living within that, and then their dialogue lives within their characters. So it was like this Russian doll system of how I got to the meat of it, in a sense. Right. And so I thought that was a good way of looking at it. And again, all this stuff, none of these things that John and I are saying are rules that if you don't follow them to the T, you will fail as a creator. These are all, like we said, structures and guides and things that you can trust, that you can lay your story and ideas over, and help you fulfill it.
Yeah.
So I hope that helped.
I hope so too. I have another one here, Regina. says, I once read that a story should have pacing like music, but I still don't quite understand what it means or how to apply it. Is it something that comes with experience? Well, all of this, you can't, until you have played with this, unless you are Mozart, who started, writing his first jingle when, tapping his toe against his mother's belly when he was -1 year old. I don't think we all need experience to be able to do this. And yeah, pacing is how many pages. It's not so much how much pages there are. There is an ebb and flow to things, but in terms of what you want to do with it, you have to, there has to be, a build up, an anticipation, an action, and then a reaction. So that's basic animation terms, but still within story-wise, there has to be an anticipation that something's going to happen here, and then it happens. And then what happens, as a result of that action, and then you have to sort of build up to something else. So there is an intertwining. Sometimes there's a plateau, but in comics and in artwork, plateaus are very boring. I think you need to. There needs to be breathing space in the action, but at the same time, you can't not be entertaining, and the entertainment still has to be, relatable to the story that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No. I was saying, I don't quite understand how. Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, you can see in the beginning, we have here, we've got introducing characters. Well, Nicky is, I'll go back to the same thing. Nicky is in the bathroom washing his hands. And then suddenly the bathroom door slams open, and he's got a bunch of bullies going after him. Well, you've got, oh shoot, what am I supposed to do here? And that's what he says. So he says, shoot, buzz off, Daryl. The bully and his henchmen are with him. Well, there's a confrontation where Nicky is standing up against, but Daryl is about twice his size, and even though Nicky he doesn't have any kind of strength, he still says, "Buzz off, get here, turd face," and whatnot. He says, "Oh yeah," and so he's swirlied,
Mm-hmm.
He's big. There's already you've got tension, you've got character, you've got setting, you've got relationships right there, and you've got to say, okay, what's going to happen? What's the payoff for later on? There's those elements in it. Well, at the end, some way when Nicky turns into Mega Moose, everybody thinks, all the kids thinks that he's the school mascot that's had a makeover, because it's the moose.
Mm-hmm.
The moose is the school mascot. They think he's in a costume, so they're pulling his head and trying to do. He just flicks his finger and just goes sending guys, flying across the room. I mean, there is a little bit of payoff there, but the thing is that we have a development of personalities, and the pacing isn't all about bang, 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 bang. There has to be like, what's going to happen to me? What's happening to this character? Well, how is this person reacting to things? So if you want to say action, anticipation, action, reaction, that's what pacing would be.
Yeah, that's a great description, and we can even add to it using Nicky and Mega Moose is, if you're looking at it like music, it's how much time do you spend on each part. because I write and play music too, so I often I think of comic writing as very similar. Like you've got your movement, you've got your measures, you've got the page could be a measure, and then that's broken into how many beats or whatever. So it's how much time do you spend on something. So if, say in this story, Nicky's in the bathroom washing his hands for 5 pages. We would be like, why is he washing his hands for 5 pages? And then the bullies come in and beat him up for 1 panel. And you'd be like, what is up with this story? Now that's an example of bad pacing, just so you know. What John said was good pacing, so you can get an idea of what we're talking about. So bad pacing, think about is how much time do you want to spend on something? You want to spend the right amount of time on something before moving on to the next piece. And so again, I'll look at Star Wars. They jump from the story of the rebels being attacked by Darth and gang, and then they jump down to, obviously that leads to Tatooine, but then we get into the Luke story. But if we spent another half hour dealing with the rebel stuff, it'd almost be like, who's this movie about by the time we got to Luke? And that would be a pacing issue. Is that you pace to exactly like John said. You have the anticipation, the action, and the aftermath, things like that. You want to have each part have the right amount, and that is something that experience teaches you greater than anything else can. But when you're starting out, go ahead and look at your favorite comic, look at your favorite movie, and don't be afraid. You don't have to copy the panels or the page count, but look how long they spend per scene and what that transition is. What do they transition to? Because sometimes you'll have a scene with the good guy and he'll end with, well, but what could go wrong? And then you cut to the bad guys have just arrived and on the planet, and that's a scene change, and that will inform your pacing a little bit too. So you got to think about like all the things John said that he listed, and then think about how much time you want to spend with each of those things. And that informs the pacing and the rhythm. And the pacing and the rhythm takes us back to what you started with, which is the tone. The pacing and the rhythm sort of, if your pacing is snappy and your dialogue matches that, you're probably leaning towards a comedy or something like that, where if things are moody and drawn out and noirish, it's probably a more mysterious or horror or something like that. So all of these things, it all sounds so daunting at first, but hopefully us breaking it all down into beats and bits and things like that, we can not only help ourselves, but help you guys figure out how to tell a story. Right.
Well, I would say this here with think of each, in many ways, your panels. In a page, you may have, a lot of panels, but it's there is a slow action going on. 9 panels, and it's all the same thing, but suddenly there's a slow right there. You have that, or you might have, the way, say, some of the Steve Ditko panels for doing SpiderMan, where he would show him bouncing around doing stuff right there. There's a lot of the same panels, but there's a different pacing right there. So those are the kinds of things. Think of each page should have some kind of satisfactory element to it that makes your audience feel like it's worth reading that page, but you want to go to the next page. And so sometimes you have to have 8 panels in a page. Sometimes it's 4. Sometimes it's 2. But make sure that within that you are giving enough that people feel, wow, I've got something. There's something new in each panel, not just visually, but story-wise. So that by the time you start with ones that, again, remember the last week we talked about the comic strips. The first of the 1930s, the story of strips. There would be 4 of them usually in the dailies. So the first one is the first panel is tells you what happened the previous day. You bring your bring up the what happened the day before. The next two is bringing up a development of more information, and then the next one is there's something new happening that makes you want to come back, and buy the newspaper the next day. Well, in this case, we don't have to have that that first panel because you can always look back, but it's still of a continual. I want to see what's happening, and then they'll go back and say, I really like this here. I want to study this panel or this page. So
I think that's a good way to break that down, John. That anyone watching, think about your page in that sense. It doesn't have to be 4 beats or 4 panels, like he was saying, like we were saying the comic strip is, but think of your page as having to have those 4 things. It draws in from the previous, it establishes its new, what's going on, and it sets you up to turn that page. Because I've talked to a few creators recently, and they were of the mindset that creating the page turn was an out-of-date technique. And I was almost like, that's like saying using a period is an out-of-date technique on how to end a sentence. I was like, why would you eliminate the page turn from your writing? I couldn't get it, because their thinking was the person's already invested in reading. And I was like, you're being a cocky writer then if you think that your story's just so good and crafted so perfectly that you don't have to make the reader want to turn that page. Even if it's a question. A lot of great writers, they just have the character ask a question that might get answered, but the reader doesn't think about, oh, I want to know that answer. It's just part of the anticipation in the action.
Right.
So yeah, I highly recommend young, new, fresh writers think about what John said there at every level, in individual dialogue, beginning, middle, and end. In that page, have your beginning, middle, and end that ties to the rest, and then your overall issue will be the same pattern. It's really, that's what's so great about it. It's this simple idea that you have to lay over so many different aspects.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this this session. I mean, it's we're about an hour and 22 into it, so whoa. Yeah, there's a lot for people to look at. I mean, we can, if there's interest and we get more questions, we can talk about how we expand upon all of this material, at another session maybe. It really depends.
Yeah.
But I think now's the time to say goodbye to all our company. So
all right.
Anyway, I want to thank you, Ryan. I hope your afternoon is a good one after this. Because I know where you are. You never know what you're going to find when you walk outside your door, right?
That's true. So maybe I'll just stay inside today and work on my book.
Yeah,
that's a safe bet.
Well, great.
No, thank you for having me, John. I appreciate it, and I wouldn't mind showing up next week for another talk if you and the fans want that.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll talk about it later on, afterwards, and go through this. Guys, everybody who's shown up, thank you. And for those who are watching this later on afterwards, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you find it edifying. And please leave comments about it. You can you can talk to me on Twitter if you wish. And Ryan, you're on what's your logo there? What's your Twitter handle, or how do you want people to contact you?
They can contact me or find me at Ryan Winn on Twitter.
Okay.
I'm also on Instagram at Ryan_inking_Winn. But if you just type in my name, it comes up and you'll see my face.
Okay. Well, I'm at Celestri John. So check us out on Twitter, and thank you all for stopping by. And as they used to say, Dick Tracy cartoons, 6-2 and even, over and out. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.